So in this video, I'm going to be showing you guys another lesson type called Weigh the Evidence. So I have a lot of these types of lessons called Weigh the Evidence, right? So as far as the ones I have, I'm going to leave some of them on the description of this video. There's a lot more. So I actually have Teachers Pay Teachers account, and all of them are posted on there for free. All the ones that I've come up with myself. Okay, so there's some on the Industrial Revolution. There's one on Hugh Glass and westward expansion. There's one on Lincoln. There's some on the Mayans. There's some on the Mongols, the barbarians, invaders of the Romans, right? So all sorts of different types of Weigh the Evidence. You can also go on Teach with Magic, and Mr. Rowan has tons of these, right, as you can see here. So on all sorts of different topics. So he's the original creator of these types of lessons of Weigh the Evidence that are very, very good lesson types when it comes to reliability of sources, argumentative writing. This is this hits on a lot of very important kind of history skills, right? So I'm going to be going over this one in particular that I created called Weigh the Evidence. Again, it's on the barbarians. So there's a little intro that goes along with it. Again, all this can be found in my Teachers Pay Teachers account for free. So the way these lessons start is basically with an essential question. Okay, so everything that the students are going to be analyzing is going to be related to this question. And for this one, the question is, were the barbarians really savages? So at the end of this lesson, they should be able to answer that using evidence from the different exhibits or sources that they will be analyzing. So the way they do it, and you can do this even on computer, it's a little more difficult, but you can also do it on paper. So I actually like to do it on paper. So I think it's a little better. But so you set up your papers in columns, right? So they write exhibit, rating, and then why. I always tell the students, make sure your why, the why part of your paper is bigger because you're going to be writing two sentences on there. The rating could be kind of small because just one number, and the exhibit, a little bit longer, worded, maybe two. So what they're going to be doing is they're going to be analyzing different sources of information. So, for example, exhibit A will be an ancient book. So this is the source that goes along with it. So it's an unknown historian around the year 300 CE. So what they do is you read this to them. So barbarians are driven by evil spirits, and then after reading it, they are going to give it ratings, right? So they're going to be answering two questions, which are: is this source reliable? Okay, so what they're going to use, obviously, going to use the source and the way they write. So in this case, for example, a student might say, "This is not so reliable or somewhat reliable because it's a Roman historian." That's what I point out to the students. Like, okay, think about the fact that they're writing about the barbarians, right? The barbarians were the enemies of the Romans, okay? And it's a Roman historian writing about them. And then they're talking about that barbarians are driven by evil spirits. So think about, could we trust this historian that's talking about barbarians being possessed, right? Essentially, right? They're possessed by demons. Their lust for gold. So again, this really should get the students thinking about bias, right? And it's a little more overt in this case, right? So yeah, it's a very. I try to pick very interesting sources on purpose, right? Just to make it a little more interesting and really get them thinking about reliability, right? So this one's kind of funny. It says, although generally considered good looking. So I'm like, yeah, they thought they were hot, right? So, he's kind of saying they're driven by evil spirits, but then he's kind of complimenting them, saying that they're good looking. So again, try to pick kind of interesting sources when doing this. So what they do is, okay, so they're gonna figure out first, is this reliable or not? And then the second question, the second thing they have to keep in mind is, were they savages or not? So based only on this source, right? Only on this source so far, based on what you read, does it show that the barbarians were savages? So in this case, right, it's saying that they're possessed by evil spirits, they have a lust for gold. So a student could conclude that based off of this, that the barbarians were savages, right? Now, that's the good thing about this type of lesson, that there is no really right or wrong answer necessarily. There are better answers than others, right? So in this case, in my opinion, I would think a zero would be a good answer, right? It's like it's not reliable because again, the Romans were opponent, or the barbarians were enemies of the Romans, and that's why they might be exaggerating and they're talking about spirits, which again doesn't make it so reliable. But you can also say, right, it would be a good answer to say that it's somewhat reliable. Well, we can kind of trust it. Someone that lived there in that time period, they were analyzing the barbarians, so you can maybe make an argument for why it's somewhat reliable and showing that the barbarians, based on what they're saying, are savages, right? So the way I like to do it is I like to read the source to them, and I like to, give them a little bit of clues about the source of information and what it's saying, kind of like I just did. And then the students write out their answers, right? So again, going back to this part, so what they're going to do is they're going to choose their rating. So I tell them, okay, I go over the different ratings, right? So if you think that it's very reliable, so I usually tell the students, okay, if you think that this source of information is very reliable and is showing that they're not savages, give it a -2. If you think it's somewhat reliable and non-savages, -1. So I go over the numbers with them because that's what usually confuses them quite a bit. So then they give it their rating, and then I tell them, okay, explain why. I want one sentence of why this source of information is reliable or not, and one sentence of how it answers the question. In this case, were the barbarians savages? So give me one sentence of why the barbarians were savages or not savages. If they give it a 0, I tell them only talk about reliability then, right? Because if you're giving it a 0, that means we shouldn't even be reading this source. It is not a good source of information at all. So that's pretty much what they're doing, right? So some of these are going to be evidence that's more weighed towards not savages. Other ones are going to be that are a little bit more about why they were savages. Just depends on the different sources that they're reading, right? So in this case, this one is another primary source, and there's some primary, some secondary sources. So this is advice. It's a letter written from a barbarian king or to a barbarian king from his mother, right? So again, when we talk about reliability for this one, for example, it's like this is very reliable because that mom thought that no one else was going to see this letter. This was a personal letter to her own son. So what she's writing here is something that's coming straight from the source, so to speak, straight from the barbarians without much bias, right? So, and this talks about how you should destroy everything that others have built and massacre everyone that you've conquered, and all these very quote unquote savage like things, right? Okay, so that would be another one. So let me give you one last example. So this one's kind of interesting as well. So this one is more weight for why the barbarians were not savages, right? So this is written from a Christian, which also could be a little more biased, right? Because I tell them, okay, remember the Romans were persecuting the Christians during this time period, so keep that in mind as you read this. And it basically talks about how the barbarians are care a lot about equality, right? They love each other, and it's talking about the Romans how they don't do that, and so basically that the barbarians have mutual respect for each other and love for each other. They work together, right? So again, that's something that would not be savage like, right? So you go over the numbers again and you explain a little bit and then they write out their answer, right? So this is perfect um, for think, pair, share, right? So this is a perfect little lesson to do that, right? Talk to your neighbor, tell them what you wrote, right? And they kind of talk about it a little bit. And I always have the students share out. That's the I think the most important part of this is the students sharing out, and you can be able to correct them, point some things out to them, and really get them to understand what to look for in a source of information and determining whether a source of information is reliable or not. Then at the very end, what they do is they add up all their numbers, right? All their positive and negative numbers and their zeros. And what they do is based on the numbers, right? So this is what's interesting about this lesson. It's based on the numbers, not on your opinion at the end, but based on the numbers. If you got a positive number, that would mean that the barbarians were savages. If you got a negative number, it would mean that the barbarians were not savages. Okay, so you're going to write your assertion first, and then your reason you're going to put this supported by exhibit, and you're going to choose one of those exhibits that we went over to support your claim or your assertion, however you want to call it. Then you tell me what the exhibit shows, what's in the exhibit, summarize the exhibit, and then how that exhibit shows that the barbarians were or were not savages. And of course, you can use 2 pieces of evidence, 3, 4, right? You can make this longer, shorter, however. I also have a little example for them. And that's pretty much how it goes, right? So there's everything that's really important when it comes to history skills, right? Writing an argument, talking about reliability, talking about bias. So this is why I love these types of lessons, these weigh the evidence lessons. And like I said, there are all sorts of different um, of examples of these types of lessons from U.S. world history. Like I said, I also have some on my Teachers Pay Teachers all for free. So yeah, definitely check it out. It's a really, really powerful a lesson type that you can do with your students, and pretty easy to make too. But you don't even have to make as much, right? Because we have so many already available. So yeah, go ahead and check it out. Give it a try.